What is going on YouTube? We are back today with a video on how we're going to use MedBalls to maximize your athleticism. Let's get into it. So how are we going to use this reasonably heavy ball to improve our athleticism? I'm breaking it down into 3 parts today. We've got plyos and jumps. How can I use this to maybe increase the overload? Maybe use the velocity and deceleration of the ball to challenge these plyometrics and jumps. The second one is going to be throwing this thing. How can I use certain throws to improve some of my athletic qualities and create adaptation there? And the third part is going to be a bit more specialist. It is going to be looking at movements that you see in track and field, using things like fake throws, using that ball again to decelerate and create large braking forces, and how that can help us out in sport. Let's get into the first one. So the first one I'm going to show you is a deep tier movement. And we're going to be using this ball to create some decelerating and higher levels of braking forces when we drop into deeper ranges of motion. Now, a typical deep tier movement without the ball might look like a split stance leap, and I'm going to be dropping down and coming back out of that movement. Our goal obviously with deep tier movements is to take into a deeper range, so we're dealing with those braking forces over a longer period of time. Now, when we bring back in this medicine ball, what I can do is I can start the deep tier movements with a medicine ball and use a carry. What does that carry do? Well, it takes away my arms. It takes away that contribution of the arms to create force, deal with overload. So I can hold and carry the med ball. I can place it into positions that make me a bit more vulnerable. Overhead, for example. I could even use the med ball out, wider position, away from my center of mass. What that's going to do is it's going to challenge my posture and how I control the ball and control the movement. So in that instance, you're probably not going to receive that much more overload. We're talking the couple of kilos that you're carrying. Where we want to take this in terms of the next step is looking at what the ball can do to add to these deep tier movements with regards to overload. And we use the ball and we create speed with it and decelerate that ball at high speeds to create more braking force. So how can we do that? Let's have a look. A favorite of mine is using this split stance leap. And what we do with the split stance leap is I take it from this hip, I'm going to swing it overhead, and that's going to give me an opportunity then to swing it down into this front hip that's being loaded. And what you'll see is it's really difficult for me to maintain my postural and dynamic postural control. So again, we're not just getting the overload into the legs that are receiving it, we're getting it with the dynamic postural control too. So we start here and down and chopped into it, down and chopped into it, down and chopped into it. The one across the body is going to be the one that you might find the hardest there. So that's a simple way in which you can attenuate force. Another example might be a simple drop and swing up, drop and swing up. Again, what you're seeing is with a normal one, without the med ball, we already have that eccentric component that's long, much longer than a stiff plyometric. So you're getting a lot of braking force work there. But what we're doing by adding the medicine ball is we're chopping into that action, we're accelerating the ball hard, and it's creating higher levels of eccentric braking force there. So give those deep tier movements a try with that attenuation of force. Recommendations here, I'm using 4 pounds, which is around 1.8 kilograms. That's pretty light. I don't think that you need much more than that. A good way for you to see that in terms of an indicator of whether the ball may be too heavy is when you do start to, if I'm in this position and I'm swinging the ball into here, okay, you're going to get a little bit of turn, natural. But what you don't want to see is like complete loss of torso there. I need to resist that, and that resistance is going to be the thing that helps us when we move dynamically. So light med balls, maximum 3 kilograms or 8 to 9 pounds. How many times a week would I be doing this? I'd be adding it in maybe once or twice a week maximum. We don't want this to be the thing that completely removes the deep tier movements without that freedom, okay? This is constraining us, and we do want that freedom to be there eventually. So I would choose maybe, let's say you're gonna do in a range of 8 to 12 different deep tier sets a week. Maybe use the MedBall in 3 or 4 of those sets. It might be that those sets could be between 8 to 15 landings. The harder and faster you swing it, the less of the reps you're gonna do because it's more intense. So let's get into the stiff stuff. Now moving into the stiff and dynamic typical plyometric movements with a MedBall. We're gonna use a bilateral leaping pattern, as we term them in the Plus Plyo system. If you are not already on our Plus Plyo subscription, you need to go to plusplyos.com and get basically plyometric Netflix. It is going to provide you with everything from 2 to 3 to 4 day splits. We have every sport that you can think of. We even have return to play versions of plyometric training, and it is just $37.99 a month. Get on it. So, stiff overcoming plyometrics with a MedBall. We are going to stick to light and medium tier movements, or rudimentary and sub-maximal forms of plyometrics. And why is that? Well, because when you add overload to something that is already maximal, the likelihood is that that maximal plyometric is going to just drop down to a more sub-maximal form of movement. The second part of that is that you are taking away the use of your arms. So we have a drop of potentially up to 20% of overall impulse when we take away our arms just by doing this. Now obviously I can still move the ball a bit. Okay, great. That's only the case if you are trying to do a movement where you're thrusting the ball. And at the same time, we also have the element of ground contact time. So if I'm trying to heave the ball every time I take off, it's going to be slower and less plyometric in nature. So let's leave aside intensive ping tier plyometrics that you call it in the Plus Plyo system, and let's stick with light tier movements. So we're going to be doing a lot of carries and holds with the MedBall when we're talking about stiff overcoming plyometrics. Let's start with a basic one. We're going to do a basic out in front of the chest carry, and I'm going to just leap on the spot. Look at it side on. What's really hard to resist as I get more and more intense is actually maintaining this position. That is what is truly the test of this, is the dynamic postural effects of this. I have to lock my shoulders in, and that is going to give me what's called a contralateral stabilization. When I lock this shoulder in effectively, at the right time, I must add. Like I should be loose in the air, and then as I hit, I'm getting that contraction. So I get grip on the ball, I get shoulder blade locks in, contralateral hip, the other side. So if my right shoulder locks in, my left hip is going to get that contraction too, and that is going to create great stabilization. So you've got to think about it in like this cross sling kind of idea. If I'm locked in here, I'm getting a really good stabilization through the whole of the pelvis instantaneously on that moment of touchdown. Some other ones that I like to do, obviously we're going to go from here. Overhead is a fantastic one. Now what I think changes in that instance is that it doesn't necessarily challenge that anterior core as much. What it does is it creates maybe just a little bit more overload because I'm stacking more head to foot, and it's very up and down stacking wise. Now, if we then move this forward a little bit into more sub-maximal medium tier movements, what I love to do is use movements like a swinging bound. And I'll give you an example of that here. So here we go with this medium tier swinging MedBall bound. If I put my right foot down, the ball goes over my right hip. Let's take a look at that. Now if you see this front on as well, you'll just see how the MedBall moves, how my body has to orientate and check itself as I do this movement. So what you actually see, which is really nice, is you probably see a little bit of kind of like the ball comes across my right side and my right leg's coming out to cast out in front of me. It probably is the case that I'm coming a little bit over. It's almost like a crossover bound. That's fine, absolutely fine. It's all part of just learning and developing that. Over time, we want to see a little bit more straight on, but there's definitely a learning curve to that. So if you've got to, start with the light tier form of it, move then into a more medium tier version of that crossover. So as you can see with the submaximal or rudimentary forms of plyometrics and using that med ball. So when we use this carrying action, we're doing a lot of like instantaneous stabilization. But when we look to move the med ball through space, have a little bit of braking action, what you're probably going to see is a little bit slower ground contact times. That's the amount of time you spend on the ground. So if it feels a bit slower, don't worry too much. That's why we're trying to keep it more sub-maximal in a way in terms of intensity. And it's really why we wouldn't want to try and creep into more maximal forms of plyometrics with a med ball. But I think you can get really creative in the way that you move the med ball. I really like to do things like, if I'm doing like a split exchange, my feet are going front to back and I'm like punching in and out. Boom, boom, boom. Again, you can use the med ball to create rhythm there as well. So again, those attenuations of force, if you're doing a straightforward leap, that ball could be swung up and down nice and quickly. It can be held out in front, it can be held overhead, it can be held out in a kind of lateral egg carry instance. And really it's about getting creative with it. But it's about getting creative to a point where you're not taking away too much from the movement itself and the quality in which you're trying to get from those movements. So those are the jumps and plyos that I would use and how I'd improve that in terms of athletic development with the use of a med ball. All right, here we go on the second part. We're going to be looking at how we can use med balls in throwing elements. I'm going to break it down into output versus input, throws versus catch and releases. I'm going to show you 3 of my favorite throws. I'll get into a little bit why I like them, and then we'll do some catch and release stuff. So, first one is kneeling. You can do this, it's kind of, I call them like a javelin toss. You can do a half kneeling or you can do a full kneeling. What is important about these is the whole body contribution. If you are just using these in isolation, then they are only going to achieve so much. What I really love about full body use in these more javelin focused kind of throws is the engagement of creating impulse through the whole of our body. Now obviously we're isolating it down to the knees, but if we're starting out, let's stay on the knees and then graduate to more feet on the ground, full body. But this really is going to give you plenty to work on in terms of hip engagement with how the whole postural and back support comes in as you toss the ball. So first one, full kneeling, 2-hand overhead toss. But what I want you to do is I want you to start with the ball down here. The ball comes back and you're going to do a wave and then toss. So the aim is to kind of try and keep the hips through whilst you get big extension through here. And then I want you to toss and land actually on your hands. So you're going to get a full kind of trajectory forward. Okay, let's give it a try. See if I can keep my hips through. It's pretty tough. Really light med ball as well. We're sticking with 4 kg or 4 pounds or 1.8 kg. So rip it through the body and toss. What I love about that just ability to just toss forward and just land is that we're not focusing on the eccentric elements of that deceleration. I am just looking to haul all I can through that implement and just create force through it. Now staying with that javelin focus, I'm going to do a javelin skip-in toss. And what you're going to see here is that we have some braking forces there as if we're going to throw an implement like a javelin, and you're going to see a little bit of an introduction of speed into braking force. And it's exactly the same as a jump. The only difference is you're not trying to propel your center of mass and move your body. You're trying to impart the force through the implement. So we try to do that in the best ways and best practices as possible. Okay, so I'm going to take a little skip in. The ball's going to be starting down at my hip. I'm a right-handed thrower, so just facing away from the camera a little bit, but you'll see it in the throw. But it'll start down here, and if I'm to do it kind of the other way around, is that I'll skip in, and as I'm coming in to get that foot ready to plant, This ball is going to be coming over the top, and I'm going to try and create the best braking action whilst I'm here. Okay, this other leg is helping me drive into this braking leg out in front. So I'm going to do it with the other side, which I'll show you as well. I'll show you a clip here and I'll show you a clip on that side to get a full idea as to what that looks like. So ball starts down here, build some rhythm into it. It's almost like a football throw-in or a soccer throw-in if you're American. So here's the view from the other side. Starts out in front, it's going to swing down here, round over the top, block, and then launch. Sounds complex. Once you get into it, it's absolutely fine. What I want to try and do here as well is as I block and as I pull from here, I'm probably going to do this. Bit of a heave, it's okay, but really we want to pull, create force from that blocking action. This leg's coming forward, this leg's coming back, and you're creating that scissoring action there. Okay, final ones of med ball throws for output is backwards heave. Simple. Start with the ball here, nice and tall. It can be as high as you want. I like it here right in front of my face. I drop down, cradle the ball nice and low in a squat pattern, and sling it backwards. And there you go. Okay, for med ball input, we have moved inside because I'm going to need a little bit of support. I might need a wall for that, or just a space where I can get support from a partner there. Okay, so first one is a high toss to a relatively stiff catch and then pop back up. What I like to try and do here as well is two different variations of it. I like to use maybe a lighter ball to start with. Okay, I can toss it up and I'm going to get into a position where I try to do it quite quick. Okay, and I'm trying to resist as much deformation or as much flexion as possible. Where it can change then is I might get a heavier med ball. Okay, this isn't a heavier med ball, but imagine it is. The heavier med ball, I'm then going to take into a little bit deeper flexion. Now, if you want to do this in different patterns, you can. I've had athletes doing it on one leg. It's really great in terms of trying to resist into trying not to collapse this way or collapse across the body. But a really simple pattern is kind of like a straddled squat position where I can get my hands in between my legs. So I toss the ball up and I drop down into a deeper position and I take it through a little bit more eccentric length. And that should in turn create slightly different changes to those catch and release mechanisms. So you got fast and you got slow and deep. Yes, great. All right, plenty. So that one there is an overhead catch and release. You can see it's a relatively quick catch and release pattern. I don't want to be like lurking all the way back in here trying to find myself balance. If I am doing so, my partner's either throwing it too hard or I'm using too heavy a med ball. Most of the time it's just the med ball that's too heavy. They can probably throw at you pretty quick and you're going to be able to control it. I use a split stance to make sure that I've got a little bit more balance. If you wanted to challenge it, you could just get yourself in a pretty nice athletic position, okay? And then, and using your hips in the same way that we did the med ball tosses, I can get my hips out in front of me to create that bowing effect to catch and release. Okay, last one of the catch and release movements is this like straddle sit. And we're really gonna be focused on challenging your posture and core here. And what I do is I like to do like a lateral toss, catch, toss, catch, toss. Now obviously there's a lot of more slower loading into that, and that's absolutely fine. There's a little bit of hand-eye coordination there, so if you wanted to toss it side to side, almost like a rugby toss, you can do that. But this and that rotation away from your body is fantastic in terms of how much core and postural trunk work you're getting in there, and rotation is fantastic for you. So that's my kind of final one for the catch and release or input-based med ball movements. So our final element of this med ball series is looking at more of a specialist-based movement. Specialist being, we're using, again, kind of those track and field, javelin-esque movements. We're gonna be using some fake throws. So a fake throw is literally, as it says, I'll use that javelin toss example. So we do a little step in, and we block. creating huge braking forces there to stop our momentum from going forward. Exactly the same in that we stop our momentum and then release the implement, ball, med ball, whatever thing that we're doing. We're stopping everything here. There is no release of energy. It is just complete braking force. That can be the same in doing like a side toss, like in a rugby toss or a side throw. You can do the same with some of these leaping actions as well, which I really love, is this block up, block up. What you're doing here is this thrust up and block. It's almost like throwing or swinging a kettlebell. And I'm coming to here, I block. The kettlebell may swing a little bit out in front and then drop down. Toss it up and block. That blocking action is that component, or braking action is that component that's creating that massive spike in braking forces, which is only going to do great things for our athletic development. So you can be really creative with these fake throws. I like to also do a fake throw where I'll fake throw and block into a wall. I'll show you that here. So in the same way that we're doing this round and toss and block. Now, the wall might be the thing that's creating the braking force, but I have to create an enormous amount of brace in order for me to not smash into the wall myself. So we're using these movements to create this torsional or extension to flexion braking forces that are going to do phenomenal work in order for you to minimize flexion or deformation when we're trying to move at speed. And again, it could also be the same of just improving your overall capacity to handle more stretch shortening cycle based movements. So fake throws is just that specialist element that you can toss in. And I'd honestly do this maybe 1 or 2 movements, maybe once a week. Good fun to play with, but ultimately the big stuff in terms of how we integrate all of this work is piecing this all together. It's doing a little bit of everything there. So MedBalls are a phenomenal tool, which I think are underutilized. There is a lot of hype around just doing the output, push, throw all the time. That concentric, explosive power. I think that's more of an expression of force there. And actually we need a mixture of this stuff. We need this to challenge our trunk dynamic posture as much as we possibly can, but also maintain the quality of movement that we're doing whilst we do these actions. Because if it is deterring too much away from what we're trying to achieve, so if I'm doing deep tier movements or if I'm doing some real ping based or fast, overcoming stiff plyometrics, I am gonna lose the quality of that. Number one, if the med ball's too heavy. Number two, if I can't handle maybe the accentuation of force or attenuation of force, sorry. And really, this needs to become a tool that enhances and not detracts from the overall performance of that. So I'd be using med balls at least once or twice a week. It doesn't need to be massive. It could just be in little spats here and there. You could even do a block of med ball training. And this is all in the Plus Plyos app. Go to plusplyos.com and you can get our subscription service, which is like Netflix for plyometrics and dynamic movement. All right, I'll see you on the next one. Poof.